Welcome to today's deep dive. Usually when you look at a map of a city, there is this underlying assumption of complete transparency.
Right, like you're seeing the whole picture.
Exactly. You see the blue line of a river, the thick black line of an interstate, those little shaded gray blocks for residential neighborhoods, and you think, okay, I understand how this place functions.
Yeah, the legend in the corner basically promises that it's all there.
But when you start actually peeling back the layers of real lived geography, specifically in those really strange pockets where massive classified government institutions and ordinary blue-collar neighborhoods literally share the exact same dirt, that 2D map becomes totally useless.
Oh, it becomes a polite fiction. I mean,
Yeah.
they're essentially looking at a landscape that is hiding a complete shadow infrastructure right in plain sight.
Which is the exact blind spot driving this manuscript we have exclusive access to today.
Yeah, this is incredibly exciting.
It really is. We are looking at a heavily guarded master draft of a highly anticipated new work by Elmer Goad, and it's literally dated today, May 24th, 2026.
Fresh off the printer.
Seriously.
Mhm.
And look, for anyone familiar with Goad, you're probably bracing for, his signature mind-bending sci-fi or some sprawling metaphysical noir.
Which is what he's known for, right?
Exactly. But this draft, it's a massive departure. I mean, he strips away the sci-fi tropes entirely.
Yeah, completely gone.
What we have here is this gritty, hyper-realistic crime saga that is grounded completely in the real classified history of the American military-industrial complex.
And he hasn't just invented a setting for this narrative either. He really excavated one.
Excavated is the perfect word for it.
Right, because the geography of Maryland, specifically, the Baltimore, D.C. corridor and Aberdeen, it dictates the entire plot. Goad relies on the real-world, top-secret evolution of DARPA to build this narrative. It's basically about how the criminal underworld and the government were essentially building parallel empires on the exact same plot of land. And neither side fully realized how perfectly their blueprints mirrored each other.
The location is undeniably the main character here. Like Goad describes Harford County as being, he says, sown twice by the B&O and Penn Central railroads.
Yeah, that imagery is so striking.
It really is. The way he writes about these iron lines establishes them as not just, transit routes, but as literal arteries that dictate where the money flows, who gets marginalized, and ultimately how people die.
Well, and the historical reality anchoring that setting is what makes it so potent. I mean, Aberdeen isn't just some random stop on a train line.
Not at all.
Since 1917, the Aberdeen Proving Ground has been the United States military's premier testing facility.
Right, for artillery, chemical weapons, advanced ordnance.
Exactly. And this isn't some facility isolated out in the Nevada desert, the civilian life of this town, the diners, the high schools, the union halls. It functions directly on top of and adjacent to generational top secret government research.
Which is just wild to think about. You have union laborers pouring concrete for a municipal project, and literally one town over, someone is testing munitions designed to define the next global conflict.
Yeah, the juxtaposition is insane.
In the world-building notes attached to this draft, Goad actually refers to this specific county as a double exposure.
Which perfectly captures the sensory reality of living there. I mean, think about a double exposure photograph.
Right, two different realities occupying the exact same frame.
Yes. You have the completely ordinary layer, the hardware stores, teenagers hanging out at the drive-in, just the mundane rhythm of a working-class town.
But bleeding through that image.
Right, bleeding right through is the second exposure. Intelligence officers, defense contractors, black ops funding.
In previous discussions we've had about concealed geography, people often use the analogy of a reversible jacket, blue collar on one side, black ops on the other.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
But reading this manuscript, that feels too superficial.
It does. It really does.
It's more like looking at a massive old-growth forest. Above ground, you see the individual trees, the diners, the houses, the locals. But underground, there is this massive interconnected root system that actually dictates the structural integrity of the entire ecosystem.
And the surface layer is almost irrelevant.
Exactly. The characters in the manuscript realize that the official world and the unofficial world are deeply intertwined. I mean, the intelligence officers and the union workers, they eat the same crabs, drink at the same bars, drive the same roads.
The line between those two exposures is just incredibly porous.
So this brings up a huge question for me. If the town is inherently designed, from an architectural standpoint, to keep government secrets, how do the criminal characters in the story exploit that? Because a hyper-secure military town seems like the absolute worst place to set up a sprawling illicit enterprise.
You would think so, right? But they do it by watching the architecture itself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the criminals learn their tradecraft by observing what those union workers are actually building underground.
Okay, so they're paying attention to the plumbing.
Exactly. And to grasp the mechanics of this, we really have to look at the real institutional history Goad weaves into the narrative.
Right, the DARPA stuff.
Yeah. So when Sputnik went up in 1957, the Pentagon didn't just panic about a satellite in space. They realized their entire terrestrial R&D architecture was fundamentally obsolete.
Because they were structured to fight the last war.
Completely.
They had systems designed for known threats, but
Yeah.
absolutely zero institutional capacity to anticipate unknown technological leaps.
Right. The United States military establishment thought it owned the future, and suddenly they were staring at this profound vulnerability.
The ultimate wake-up call.
So to prevent another technological surprise, they created ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. And they deliberately bypassed the massive, sluggish Pentagon bureaucracy.
They made it super lean, right?
Lean, flat, and with essentially unaccountable budgets.
And as the manuscript tracks this agency into the 1970s, the operational philosophy shifts drastically towards stealth.
Yes, the focus really pivots.
Because the military was looking at the Soviet Union's second echelon, those massive, overwhelming tank battalions stationed in Eastern Europe, and they realized that matching them tank for tank in a ground war was just a mathematical impossibility.
And this is where the concept of the offset strategy was born.
Offset strategy, right?
If you can't outnumber a conventional force, you render their numbers irrelevant through precision, stealth, and decentralized surveillance.
Okay.
The goal was to identify and eliminate every Soviet tank before it even reached the front line. But, and this is executing that kind of decentralized, over-the-horizon warfare, requires a physical infrastructure that cannot be detected by the enemy.
Which sets up one of the most compelling, historically grounded plot points in the whole draft.
Oh, the vault.
Yes. So a local union construction worker is hired for a job that is completely off the books. He is tasked with building a hardened, lead-lined, EMP-proof communications vault.
And the physical location of this vault is brilliant.
It's hidden directly beneath a rural Maryland cable TV tower.
It is the ultimate camouflage of function. I mean, above ground, anyone driving by just sees a mundane civilian utility installation.
Just some cables and metal.
Right. But below ground, it is a classified intelligence node designed to survive a nuclear electromagnetic pulse.
And the union men pouring that concrete, they know the exact structural specifications, like the thickness of the lead, the depth of the rebar.
But they are kept entirely blind to its strategic purpose.
Right. But I gotta say, I do struggle with the underlying premise here a little bit.
How so?
Well, Gordon makes a really significant point about the agency's constant rebranding. It starts as ARPA. Then in 1972, the Nixon administration adds defense to make it DARPA.
Right.
Then under Carter, it reverts to ARPA. Under Reagan, it flips back to DARPA. From the outside, this reads like a massive, inefficient bureaucracy suffering from a severe identity crisis.
It does seem pretty schizophrenic.
Exactly. It's constantly warring with itself over whether it conducts pure civilian research or applied military weaponry. So my question is, how is a clunky, unstable government agency supposed to serve as the gold standard for a nimble, hyper-efficient criminal enterprise?
See, that institutional friction is precisely the point.
Wait. Really?
Yeah. The agency's identity crisis, that constant tug of war between civilian science and military application, it actually creates massive operational gaps.
Oh, nice.
When an agency's mandate is constantly shifting, its oversight mechanisms fracture. The resulting blind spots like unmonitored physical spaces, heavily compartmentalized funding, decentralized communication nodes, those are exactly where clever operators thrive.
So it's a feature, not a bug for the criminals.
Exactly. Goad's central thesis is that the criminal underworld doesn't just copy the government's infrastructure, they actively parasitize those exact bureaucratic blind spots.
Wow. It's an incredible parallel. Just the idea that a street-level shadow economy and the Cold War intelligence apparatus are basically solving the exact same logistical equations.
And we see this conceptual framework introduced really early in the draft during the 1968 Baltimore riots.
That scene is so cinematic.
It really is. The city is literally burning. The National Guard is mobilizing. But inside this quiet, neutral bar, A crime family matriarch is completely ignoring the street violence outside her window.
Right. She's not managing her street corners or panicking over lost territory.
Not at all. She is secretly studying stolen municipal acquisition maps.
Because while everyone else is reacting to the immediate chaos, she is analyzing the architecture of the future.
Yeah, she's looking for upcoming zoning changes, planned highway expansions, future utility lines.
She realizes that holding a street corner today means absolutely nothing if the city is just going to bulldoze it for an interstate tomorrow.
Exactly. Whoever holds the paper when the city's infrastructure comes calling holds the actual power.
That is so cold, but so smart.
And that realization that true dominance is structural, not territorial, that becomes the inherited thesis for the next generation,
Yes, and this mindset is totally adopted by the story's young protagonist.
who just happens to be the son of the union worker who built that EMP-proof communications vault under the TV tower.
Right, this hyper-observant teenager who just spends his youth quietly logging everything happening around him. He watches the union bosses, the military men, the local criminal figures.
He's just observing it all.
And the real turning point for him happens when he eavesdrops on a Defense Intelligence Agency officer discussing DARPA's targeting architectures and their reliance on redundant, decentralized communications networks.
Yeah, the teenager processes that classified military doctrine and applies it directly to the local illicit economy.
Which is wild.
He realizes that selling contraband hand-to-hand on a street corner is just a fool's game. It's visible, it's vulnerable, and it treats the symptom rather than building a resilient system.
Okay, but let's pause here. How does a teenager actually translate NATO defense logistics to a suburban illicit network? I know the draft lays it out, but the sheer mechanics of it are staggering to think about.
Well, he mimics the offset strategy we talked about earlier.
Oh, okay.
So the military's goal was to decouple the sensor from the shooter, meaning the unit detecting the tank isn't the unit firing the missile.
Right.
The teenager decouples the product from the transaction. He sets up decentralized dead drops. He utilizes the union laborers, the exact same men his father works with, as unwitting logistical nodes.
Wow, just moving small pieces of cargo within the mundane machinery of their daily routes.
Exactly. And he creates redundant communication lines using a network of pagers and public payphones. That ensures that if one node is compromised by law enforcement, the larger network remains entirely dark and operational.
He looks at the intelligence community and realizes they are just moving resources without being seen.
That's all it is.
Supply chains, maintaining deniability, staying completely off the radar. He treats a local suburban contraband ring with the exact same logistical rigor as preparing for a Soviet ground invasion.
Because the underlying motivation for building these massive, invisible infrastructures is identical, whether you are NATO or a street-level syndicate.
It's all about risk management.
It is a desperate attempt to mitigate chaos. Chaos is the ultimate threat. It destroys carefully planned military campaigns, and it destroys illicit supply chains with equal prejudice.
And Goad illustrates the catastrophic cost of that chaos in a really pivotal, incredibly gritty sequence in the manuscript.
A house party.
Yeah, there's this totally out-of-control house party in a wealthy Maryland suburb. It escalates, and the drug-addicted son of a Maryland Supreme Court Chief Justice ends up shooting 2 people.
A completely unpredictable, catastrophic human error.
The fallout is just devastating to the local shadow economy. Because the shooter is highly connected, the resulting police crackdown is massive and immediate.
Right, law enforcement descends on the entire county.
Checkpoints go up, surveillance intensifies, and the entire illicit supply chain comes to a grinding halt. Millions of dollars in commerce freeze simply because one privileged individual lacked discipline and introduced unmanageable chaos into the system.
And that specific incident triggers a genuine masterclass in criminal philosophy delivered later in the narrative.
Yes.
There's this veteran motorcycle club enforcer, a character who operates in that highly dangerous liminal space between the legal economy and the underground.
He sits the young protagonist down to explain the structural reality of their business. And this enforcer is a terrifying figure.
He really is.
He isn't some hot-headed thug. He is cold, methodical, and purely analytical.
He explains to the teenager that the general public fundamentally misunderstands organized crime. The public thinks the mafia is about violence, but the enforcer notes that violence is actually a failure of logistics.
That's such a great line.
Right. When you have to shoot someone, your system has already broken down. He explains that syndicates survive for decades not through brutality, but through rigid structure and succession.
They build administrative systems designed to absorb catastrophic human error, like a panicked kid with a gun without collapsing the entire enterprise.
Which leads to arguably the most resonant line in the entire draft.
Yeah, when the enforcer looks at him and says, "The people who understand plumbing build empires. The people who think about empires build things that flood when the pressure changes."
It just perfectly encapsulates the thematic core of the manuscript. If your focus is entirely on the visible empire, controlling the territory, the reputation, the street corners, you remain incredibly vulnerable to the slightest shift in environmental pressure.
A sudden police raid, a rival faction, a chaotic double homicide.
The pressure spikes, the pipes burst, and your empire floods.
But if you focus exclusively on the plumbing,
The unseen pipes, the supply chains, the redundant communication lines, the vaults hidden beneath mundane TV towers.
yeah,
If you control the infrastructure, you survive any surface level disruption. And the young protagonist internalizes this completely. He decides in that moment that he has absolutely no interest in fighting over visible territory.
he doesn't want to control the street. He wants to literally become the corridor itself.
He wants to become the invisible geography that every other faction is forced to rely on.
It is a brilliant pivot for the narrative,
Yeah.
and frankly, it's a brilliant pivot for Elmer Goad as an author. Stripping away the metaphysical elements and rooting this story deeply in the gritty, classified reality of Cold War military R&D and local Maryland organized crime.
Mm-hmm.
It just proves that historical reality is infinitely more complex than fiction.
Absolutely. And the implications of that history stretch far beyond the pages of this manuscript. I mean, if you process what Goad is exposing here, it fundamentally changes the nature of your daily commute.
Yeah, it really does.
When you drive past an ordinary diner, a massive warehouse, or an unassuming utility tower sitting quietly in a field, you can no longer assume you're looking at the whole picture.
Not at all.
That visible layer might just be the polite fiction hiding a vast invisible network designed by people who possess a master's degree in plumbing.
The manuscript exposes how the military-industrial complex of the 70s and 80s was literally burying the logistical technology of the 21st century right under Maryland soil, while simultaneously shadow economies were quietly mirroring that exact architecture.
Pretty chilling.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the next time you walk around your own city, look down at that 2D map on your phone and ask yourself, what invisible infrastructures are being built right under your feet right now, waiting to quietly dictate the next 50 years of human history?